Hey, I'm Doug, and welcome to Doppler's Gear Garage, where today we are celebrating the release of the RJM music technology PBC 6X. In fact, this is the official launch video. All right, awesome. PBC as in Pedalboard controller. Great for controlling a small collection of pedals and a number of rigs, which is what we're going to be doing in this video. 6X means there are 6 loops, 3 mono, 3 stereo, as well as a stereo insert. Now, there's kind of a funny story about this giant collection of stuff I put together. So before I go any further, I'd like to introduce you to the man himself behind this PBC 6X and so much of this great technology, Ron Manelli.
Yeah, I definitely recognize that board. I dragged that thing to, well, not that one, but one just like it. Dragged it to Nashville and back, my first touring experience, and brought it to Summer NAMM 2015 with the PBC 10 in tow. And yeah, that was really informative. I got to feel what it was like to drag your gear on a plane. And immediately after that, I said, "Hey, guess what? I'm got to make something smaller because not everyone's going to want to do this." Kind of defeated the purpose putting it on a big board like that, but you know, it's a cool board anyway, and good job. But yeah, for me, I'm going with smaller boards from now on.
So it would appear I have a little splaining to do. All right, 24 hours ago, this board didn't exist, and I've been in touch with the Manellis pretty constantly for the past several weeks as I was preparing to do this. And I was talking with Sherry Manelli, and I was like, you know, rather than having separate boards for the separate demos, I'm thinking about putting this big giant board together. Of course, Ron was like, really? That's what he was trying to get away from with the PBC 6X. And, you know, here's the thing. This thing is nice and small. And really what he was talking about was going to NAMM with the PBC 10, which is kind of not really the predecessor, but it's the pre-existing kind of form factor. And as the name implies, it's got 10 loops. The 6X has 6 loops, but unlike the 10, the X means that you can reorder the loops, which is very, very cool. Say you've got something like an Eventide H9, which I have too. I just couldn't make the power work to get that on the board. I felt really bad about pulling it. But you can use it for kind of octave effects, modulation, short modulation that is, at the beginning of the chain, and then you can use it for delays and reverb. So being able to move that one pedal back and forth is very helpful. Also, because it's a true stereo effect, you can actually put it in 2 different places simultaneously. Very cool. I digress. All right, so the idea was to put together one board that I could use for all these rigs and not have to unplug anything, with the exception of the one pedal that you're going to see me unplug there. One other thing is, the PBC 10 has a built-in line mixer. This one doesn't. But what I do have here is basically the RJM mini line mixer. And so what you heard in that last little country thing was a combination of the bloom and then also kind of a harder reverb with the Big Sky. But the Big Sky is actually after this. And so I was on YouTube, and there was a YouTube Live. Mason from Vertex was on there, and somebody asked him, you know, well, can you get more than 6 loops? And I was like, So it got me thinking about some of the different ways I could do things. So what I'm doing is I'm coming out of here, splitting the signal. In turn, I'm going to the tone saver buffer, which is splitting the signal again, which is going into both the timeline and the Big Sky in mono, and then they're coming out in stereo and coming back into the line mixer. And then also the direct signal, if you will, the dry signal rather, is coming into the line mixer as well, and then that's coming out in stereo. So basically what that enables us to do is just get the pure wet signal out of these guys, which is really, really awesome. Very, very clean, easy to do. All right, so this next demo is the only one where I'm actually going to unplug something, and I'm going to kind of go into the high gain end of things. And this is kind of the Vacation rig. So here's the deal. Years ago, I used to be Steve Vai's guitar tech, and a couple of summers ago, I was teaching at Joe Satriani's G4 Experience in New York, and Steve was a special guest, and Thomas Nordegg and Mike, Joe's tech, said, hey, you know, can you help out put together a little fly rig for Steve? So Thomas kind of sent me a list of stuff, and that was basically a Boss Chorus and 2 DD7s. And so what I kind of did here was I kind of recreated that rig. But the way Steve runs that rig is very unique. Basically, he runs into 1 amp, the master head, comes out of the preamp out, goes into a chorus, at least for that little rig. Split that out in stereo to one DD7, which went into the return of the master head, and then the other DD7 went into the slave. And the way these carvings are set up, you can basically turn the master volume up and down on the master head, and both amps go up and down at the same time proportionally. Very cool. So effects loops and isolation transformers are two things I want to talk about before we move on to the next demo. A lot of amplifiers don't have effects loops, and usually that's because in a clean amplifier, you can run the effects into the front end without any bad artifacts. But if you have as distorted a gain sound as I had there, and you were to run a delay or reverb into the front end, it might not necessarily sound super pleasing. So effects loops basically function like this. You have the pre-amplifier section of the amplifier, and that's where the effects loop gets placed after the pre-amplifier and before the power amplifier. The power amplifier amplifies the sound, the pre-amplifier creates the tone, and the effect sits in between the two in the effects loop. So basically you come out of the preamp out, also known as the send, you run into your effect, you run back into the power amp in, also known as the return, and then that gets powered up. Okay. Now, when you hook up two amplifiers, quite often you get these things called ground loops, and it sounds bad. A little something like, And so I'm using actually three different isolation transformers here, not at the same time. Well, I guess I'm using it at the same time, but they're actually all kind of active in slightly different ways, and only one of them in this particular rig was active in the classic isolation transformer way, and that's the one from EbTech back there. That's called the Hum Eliminator, I believe, and they're getting ready to send me an 8-channel version of that, so we can use this to basically be able to use it as an amp switcher. Very cool. Okay, this guy is the interfacer from Goodwood Audio. You're going to see this on a lot of Praise and Worship guys' boards. They make the pedal boards for a lot of the guys in Hillsong, Bethel, Jesus Culture. These guys are awesome, and their gear is awesome. This right here, I mentioned it before, is the tone saver. I'm using it as a very expensive splitter box, but I could also use it back there by the amp, and it's also got a buffer in it. Awesome. On to the next rig. We're going to use this particular preset to unpack a couple of really important things. First of all, how incredibly easy the PBC is to use and program, even if you don't want to use any MIDI or deep editor. We're also going to talk about how I used MIDI to kind of craft that preset and switch between different speaker models on the power cabs. It's incredibly powerful. And then I want to take a moment and kind of talk about sound design in general. We're going to start there. Basically, I spend a lot of time crafting the sounds that I take out into the world, whether it's Sunday morning at church or whether it's at the guitar camps or wherever it is that I might be playing. I really want my sounds to sound great. That's really important, regardless of what people may or may not think of the playing. I always love it when people go, man, your guitar sound was awesome. That's really important to me, and I think it's important to all of us. So having some strategies for getting a great guitar sound is kind of what this section is about. All right. What you just heard was a combination of the HX Stomp on a twin reverb model into two power cabs behind me. That one's running a speaker model of a vintage Jensen, and that one is running a speaker model of a modern Eminence. Okay, so the idea is I'm using two different speaker models to kind of add some depth of field. Now what's neat about power cab and makes it completely different than anything else on the market is that it is an actual guitar cabinet. It has an actual 12-inch speaker created for guitar. And what it does, unlike by ours, is you're loading speaker models in there, which is really like kind of going, oh, All right, let me put in a Celestian blue. All right, let me put in a greenback. All right, let me put in an eminence. So it allows you to load those things either using the interface there or via MIDI, which is, again, the power of MIDI. With a single button press, I'm able to toggle between which speaker model I'm calling up. That's huge. I love the sound, and kind of one of the important things, especially if you're working in the box here, to be able to hear what it sounds like in your home environment when you're doing the sound design, and knowing if I put either that mic, which is the Roswell Pro Audio Mini K47, which I love, or if I'm out someplace and that is not in the picture, I know where to place a 57. I know what this is going to sound like pretty much anywhere in the world. That is a big deal. All right, moving on, I want to talk about how incredibly easy this thing is to program. I also want to give you some hints on kind of signal chain. When I started out working with this box, the first thing that I did was I put together this sloppy little list of kind of what went where in terms of the audio loops. In turn, I memorized that such that now I can kind of look at this board and I know what loop this guy is in, so on and so forth. Which means when you go to program things, it gets really easy. Out of the box, this guy is in what's called preset/bank up and down button page. And I'm going to use the bank up button, and I'm going to select this preset button, and we're going to create a brand new preset. All right, if I hit the function switch once, I'm in the loops button page, which means I can turn on whichever loops I want to have on or off. Now, again, because I was pretty meticulous in how I ordered what things were in, I know that this is loop 1, this is loop 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and I'm controlling those via MIDI after the whole thing. But we're not going to talk about MIDI for right now. All right, because of that, if I want to create a preset using the Dynacomp and the King of Tone, Dynacomp is there, King of Tone is there, I hold this button down, and that saves it. Now, if I just hit that one more time, I'm now in the switches button page. So if I were going out of this into my deluxe reverb and I wanted to use the remote foot switch functionality to turn on the reverb for this preset, I just did it, I hold, and now it saved it. All right, I hit this one more time and I'm back in the preset/bank up and down button page. I'm going to bank down and I'm going to select preset 1 to talk about MIDI. There are 4 main elements that make up MIDI basics. The I/O. MIDI is transmitted via MIDI out. It's received via MIDI in, and it's relayed via MIDI through. MIDI channels. There are 16 of them that kind of act like phone numbers. Program changes allow you to send a message to something like a timeline and tell it to change presets. Control changes are how you send a message to something like a timeline and tell it to change one or more parameters within a preset. Although MIDI doesn't actually carry any audio signal, the program changes and CC messages it does carry are in many ways just as important as audio, and in particular with a rig like this, you want to make sure you get it right. So there are a couple of really important things to keep in mind. 1, HX Stomp, Timeline, Big Sky, all shipped from the factory with MIDI through switched off. So if you want to telegraph information down the line here, you're going to want to go into the internal menus and switch that on. Also, they all come set to MIDI channel 1. That's not how you want to leave them. Again, you're going to want to go into the internal menus, but before you start changing the MIDI channel, you want to have a strategy. Now, a minute ago, I made this analogy that the MIDI channel is kind of like a phone number. Let's say that you and I have the same cell phone number, and somebody calls us, and I'm like, hey, it's Doug, and you're like, no, it's me. No, it's Doug. We've got crosstalk. This is a nightmare. This is a meltdown. This is bad. The same thing can happen if you don't, actually not can, will happen if you don't have separate MIDI channels for these things and you want to tell this guy to go to one preset and this guy to go to another preset. So again, the way we do that is we establish different MIDI channels for these devices. And we want to have a strategy for doing it just like we do for our audio. So like our audio, we just want to think about it in the order of the signal chain. So whatever the first MIDI compliant device is in your signal chain, which for me is this one, I'm going to give that the next MIDI number. So coming out of here, MIDI channel 2, MIDI channel 3, MIDI channel 4, MIDI channel 5 in order of the MIDI signal flow, which also chases the audio signal flow. So I can always kind of think of those two as a parallel. Great. Now, there are some MIDI compliant devices that I have that are not on my board. So those I start labeling MIDI channel 10 and above. My Marshall JVM, MIDI channel 10. My Boogie JP2C, MIDI channel 11. That Power Cab, MIDI channel 12. And that one, MIDI channel 13. All right, so with that in mind, let's say I want to pull this guy and this guy off my board, and I want to have a little baby rig and that Power Cab. Because I had a strategy for how I set up the audio loops, I know this guy is in loop 6. So that means I would pull this guy off, disconnect all the cables, pull this guy and just set it up in loop 6. In turn, in terms of the MIDI I/O, this guy is sending MIDI out messages, it's transmitting them to the MIDI in on the HX Stomp. The HX Stomp is using the MIDI through to transmit those to the MIDI in on the Power Cab over there. In turn, I would also remember that HX Stomp is set to MIDI channel 3, and that Power Cab is set to MIDI channel 12. So the sound you just heard is a combination of HX Stomp, a Celestion greenback model in that Power Cab, and a Celestion Alnico blue model in that one. So for this preset, I'm doing some really cool things with the PBC 6X that whether you're an HX Stomp user or a Helix user or not, it's going to give you some insight in terms of how you can use this, much like you would target an individual parameter inside something like a Strymon pedal. And that's going to be, like we talked about a minute ago, using CC messages. Now, as I toggle between these 3 presets here, I'm toggling between 3 snapshots on the HX Stomp there. And those are kind of analogous to individual parameters into something like a Strymon pedal there. All right, so here's the deal. As I toggle this encoder here, you're going to see the different blocks are illuminated. And as I press it, I can turn blocks on or off. And in turn, I could store those to one of 3 snapshots inside that preset. And in turn, I can target those via CC messages. Pretty straightforward. So I'm going to head back here, and if I hit this button now, you're going to see some numbers right there. One is you're going to see PC, which stands for program change. We already learned that. Number 87, saying that if I want to target one of those snapshots, I got to first of all give a program change message of 87. And down below that, you're going to see CC 69. And as I toggle between the 3 different presets on the PBC 6X or the 3 different snapshots on HX Stomp, those 3 numbers are going to switch between 000, 001, and 002. And I'm using that to target those snapshots via the Mastermind editor. So let's take a look at how I did that. Most of the heavy lifting you're going to do is probably going to be on the presets tab, where we've got these 3 presets that we're working with now. All right, jumping over to the devices tab, I've got my MIDI devices here on the left-hand side, and I've kind of set up this one-to-one relationship, although I could place the HX Stomp anywhere in my device list. Since HX Stomp, I chose MIDI channel 3 based on kind of where it sat in, if you will, the MIDI signal chain. I wanted to place it as my 3rd device, so kind of one-to-one. It's my 3rd device, and I've got it mapped to MIDI channel 3. Now over here, you've got a manufacturer pull-down menu, which is already set for line 6, and in turn set for HX Stomp. Look at all the options this gives you. This is huge, saves a ridiculous amount of time when you're going to program the sort of stuff we're about to talk about. Moving back over to the presets tab. Here again are our 3 presets, and up here is where we name them. So this first one is HX/S 30-1, which is preset 30, snapshot 1. As you might have guessed, the next one is going to be -2 for snapshot 2, and the next one is -3 for snapshot 3. Moving back over to HX/S space 30-1, which is, again, that's going to allow us to target that first snapshot there. We are going to look over at the HX Stomp program change and make sure it's going to the right place, which it is. That's going to program change 87, 87 for the second snapshot, and 87 for the third snapshot. If we don't have the right program targeted here, none of what we're about to do down here is going to work. All right, now selecting this little area down here in the Preset Actions sub-tab, you're going to see where all the magic happens. We've got this action type set for CC toggle. We've got the device selected for HX Stomp. And what's really neat about this is that it just enables you to do this really, really quickly. All right, now when we were back over looking at HX Stomp, you remember we saw that for the CC number, it was going to be 69. And the value was actually 000 to target snapshot 1. And when I hit enter here, that truncates to 0. Kind of the same thing happens over here. This menu should look very similar. And when we type in 001, that truncates to 1. And then over here for the third snapshot here, selecting this, when we type in 002, that truncates to 2. Awesome. Before we move over to the pedal board, there's one other really important thing I want to show you. Now you've already seen what the presets, loops, and switches button pages do. I've created a new button page called Stomp. And in the global tab here, I took the max button page number from 3, the stock number, to 4, such that this button page here would display. And what I've done is for comp, gate, and delay, inside HX Stomp, and I've named those button pages there, for the gate there, and for the delay right there. What I've done is I've added some really cool functionality utilizing the learn function inside HX Stomp, which I'm going to show you in just a minute. Now out of the gate, there's one little checkbox that you need to make sure you deselect, or else you're going to have trouble. So the send on preset change, make sure that is deselected. All right, now down below here is where the magic is happening. In action type, I've chosen CC toggle. For device, I've chosen HX Stomp. The CC number, I have arbitrarily chosen 100 with a purpose, but I've chosen 100. The off value is set to 127, and the on value is set to 0. I can either hit the done button or just hit the return key. All right, moving over to gate, I already showed you how I named that up here. Again, I made sure to deselect the send on preset change, and over here we are seeing something pretty familiar. Action type set to CC toggle, the device set to HX Stomp. Now this number here, I've selected 101. And as you might imagine, by the time I back out of here and move over to the delay, looking at that same panel there, you're going to see that I've selected 102. All right, now a couple of important things. One is you want to make sure you save all your changes here using the File menu. Boom. The other thing is you want to make sure then you go ahead and transfer any changes. You're going to write them over to the device like that.
So that was a lot. So let's take a moment and recap exactly what we did in the order that we did it. We started off by making 3 presets on the PBC 6X, and those allowed us to access these 3 snapshots within that preset on HX Stomp. Pretty straightforward. Boom, boom, and boom. All right, within each of these presets, I created a button page called Stomp that allows me to access the individual blocks that I wanted to target on the HX Stomp. And in turn, I'm able to turn the compressor on or off via this button, the hard gate on or off via this button, and the delay on or off via this button. So how did I do that? Well, we started off over here programming that into the Mastermind editor. We sent that over to the PBC 6X, and then in turn that needs to be communicated in the HX Stomp. So let me show you how we did that. We want to make sure, first of all, there we go, that we're on the compressor. We hit these 2 encoders at the same time. We hit this one once, and we page over, and you can see that number 100 is right there. Now I use this encoder to turn from side to side to put that number in there. I purposely selected that for reasons that we're not going to go into right now. Now, to be able to learn this, I hit this button, and then I hit the encoder that I want to associate with that, which is this first button here, and then it memorizes that. Then I turn this knob right there, and I do the same thing. This one you'll see now is set to 100 and 1. Hit learn, hit this encoder here,
or button. And then in turn, we move over to the delay here. And I'm going to need to page over like that. And you're going to see that's set to 102. I set that to learn, and I hit this guy, and boom, it's in memory. And then the important thing to do is to hit save. So before we move on, I wanted to take a moment and play through each of those sounds and kind of talk about them a little bit so you can kind of hear them together. At the very top of the segment, you heard this guy. Okay, in terms of HX Stomp there, basically what I'm running is a deluxe comp model into the hard gate. The hard gate is going out into a splitter. On one side, I've got the Fawn AC30 model, and on the other side, I've got the Essex AC30 model. They go back into a mixer. That goes into a stereo dual delay. One side goes out into, there you go, you already know, the greenback. The other goes into the Alnico speaker models. All right. Now, this second snapshot mutes the hard gate. And if I put this guitar in this position, you can hear it buzz. And then if I move over into the third snapshot there, the gate comes back on, but we've turned the delay off for that funky sound you heard a minute ago. All right, Grant and Mikey from Goodwood Audio have put together pedal boards for the virtual who's who of the praise and worship world. Droff, Michael Guy Chislett, Saint Pope, Jeffrey Kunde, as well as mainstream artists like Mateus Asado, and everybody's heard of Mateus. They also build these amazing junction boxes. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Grant and Mikey.
Hey guys, Mikey here. Grant. We are at Goodwood Audio in our workshop here in Sydney, Australia. Doug asked us to give our opinion on the new 6X and what we love about it. For me, the biggest selling point for RJM, in particular the Mastermind series, is their software. Yes, their hardware is amazing, but their software is head and shoulders above everything else, especially if you want to get into MIDI land. Being able to identify CC and PC numbers quickly and program them to different devices and presets is it's a breeze.
And the 6X itself, amazing MIDI implementation, talks to pedals really easily, again, through the software. And then the thing I love about it, which I was skeptical about, was loop reordering. The ability to reorder loops is self-explanatory, but the fact that it doesn't affect your tone and you can use it in a bunch of creative ways on the 6X that Ron is going to expand on in the future. It's an incredible product in a very small footprint when you think about what it's actually capable of. And lastly, mono, stereo loops, and insert loops is just very powerful, all around amazing unit.
Yeah.
Needless to say, I'm a fan.
Big fans. Hope that helps.
Before I deconstruct that sound you just heard, which is one of my favorites, I absolutely love that, to talk about what I'm doing here on the board, it's really going to be really valuable, especially for some of you that are either new to playing in stereo or new to this type of switcher, to deconstruct some of the important things about the types of cables we're going to use, the termination, and the rounding in and out of the PBC 6X. All right, in the image that you're looking at, on the left-hand side, you're seeing, yeah, that's a guitar amplifier, a mono sound source. And on the right-hand side, you're seeing a pair of headphones, a stereo sound source. Right, so here's the deal. If you place that guitar amp on that side of the room, or you move it over there, it's going to pretty much sound the same because it is a mono sound source. If you put on a pair of stereo headphones, the left side's here, the right side's there, and then you flip them around, it's going to sound different because you've got two different things going on. You've got a left channel and a right channel. With your average guitar amp, it's just one thing. It's mono. Headphones, stereo. So here's the deal. In looking at this next diagram here, you're going to see on the lower right-hand side there a range of DiMarzio cables like I'm using on this pedal board. Those are all terminated in tip sleeve plugs, and that's a mono termination. In the upper left-hand corner there, you're going to see a HOSA cable, much like the ones that I'm using on the pedal board here, that on one end is terminated in a tip ring sleeve plug. That's a stereo plug. And on the other end, it fans out to a pair of tip sleeve mono plugs. So for the PBC 6X, you could run the entire thing in mono. And if you're going to do that, you're only going to use tip sleeve terminated cables. That is to say, they're going to have a tip sleeve plug on the end of that cable. Any run that you're going to use that's going to send or return in stereo, you have to use a tip ring sleeve terminated cable. All right, loops 1 through 3, only mono. So you only want to use tip sleeve terminated cables. Loops 4 through 6, the insert and the output of the PBC 6X, you have your choice of either sending or returning in mono or stereo. And again, anytime you want to send or return in mono, use a tip sleeve cable. Anytime you want to do it in stereo, you have to use a tip ring sleeve terminated cable. So the acoustic preset is one of my favorites, and there are a number of very interesting things happening here on the board. All right, first of all, the only things that were on were the MXR Dynacomp, the 2 Boss delays, and the Strymon timeline, and that's going out into the 2 power cabs. This one's still set for a Celestion Greenback model. This one is still set for a Celestion Alnico Blue model. Now I've changed a little bit of the routing on the board here, and I'm coming out of the mini line mixer into the interfaces, so kind of all the ins and outs here are now being managed through the interfacer. It's a much better way to do things, and that's kind of the thing that we do with pedal boards. We're constantly tweaking, right? Okay, now in terms of what's going on with the Boss pedals, I want to take a moment and talk about the tap tempo macro inside the Mastermind editor. Under the macros tab in the Mastermind editor, you have the ability to use something called a tap tempo macro. And that's how I'm sending tap tempo messages to the DD7s. Now what's interesting is they are digital, but they are not MIDI, which means the only way I can send tap tempo information to them normally is by sitting there with some tap tempo foot switch. Well, Ron Manelli, in his infinite wisdom, figured out a way to do that from the PBC. What I want you to do real quick is I want you to listen to the relays here, and I want you to watch what's happening and turn on the Boss pedals as I change presets. So what Ron's figured out a way to do is use relays inside the PBC 6X to send tap tempo messages to those pedals. All right, now you may not have known this about the DD7s, but basically there's a mode control that chooses kind of the range of delay times. And at the longest setting, if you use a tap tempo going into that pedal, like an external foot switch, or even the internal functionality inside there, it's going to tap out to quarter notes. If you use the second to longest delay mode setting, it will tap to dotted eighths. So this one's set at the longest one, this is set at the next to longest one. So basically when I'm sending out these tap tempo messages, those 2 delays will beat sync in terms of quarter notes and dotted eighths to the tempo of the song or the preset. That is incredibly cool. To do that, I'm just coming out of here using the function jack. That is a tip ring sleeve jack that is using an insert cable that's terminating in 2 tip sleeve jacks over here. So that was a great example of the overdriven goodness that loop reordering can bring to stacking drives. All right, the signal chain for the first preset was the MXR Dynacomp into the King of Tone, into the Morning Glory, into the Boss delays, into the Big Sky, out into the power cabs. And then for the second preset, I simply flipped the order of the King of Tone and the Morning Glory and ran the Morning Glory into the King of Tone. So let's take a look at the face of the PBC 6X and look at the display and see what it shows you so you can see from the face of the unit what loops are on and what the order is. So if you take a look at the bottom of the screen here, as I toggle between these 2 presets, whatever loops are on are going to be illuminated in black, and you're also going to see the number indicating what the order is. So for drive 1, we had loop 1, loop 3, loop 4, and loop 5. And loop 3 and 4 was where I had the King of Tone and Morning Glory. Moving over to preset 2, now you can see that the order of the King of Tone and Morning Glory have flipped. So that's the Morning Glory, and that's the King of Tone. So the ability to create 4 different drive sounds out of 2 different drive pedals is so cool. King of Tone on its own, Morning Glory on its own. King of Tone into the Morning Glory, and then flipping the order, Morning Glory into King of Tone. So let me show you how I did that from the face of the PBC 6X. Moving back to the first preset, I'm going to access the Stomp button page, and I've added a new function that allows me to directly access the setup menu. And I can scroll down that setup menu until I get to audio settings, and I'm going to select that. In turn, I can scroll down until I get to loop order, and now wherever I've got this cursor, it allows me to move whatever loop is illuminated there in black using these two, if you will, encoders. So that literally is how I went from preset number 1 of these 2 presets to preset number 2. It was that easy. Brian Carl is the guitar player in the Passion Band, and he's also a pretty prominent Kemper profiler. So if you're a member of the Kemper community, chances are you've heard of him. And if you haven't, you might want to check him out at briancarlmusic.com. In any case, Brian is the first guitar player in the entire world to have a PBC 6X on his touring pedal board. That board was put together by one of the rising stars of the pedalboard community, a guy named Brian Emilian of Emilian Audio. So we wanted to catch up with Brian Carl and see what he thought of the PBC 6X and his new board.
I'm absolutely loving the PBC 6X. It has been a game changer in several ways, but one of the best things about it, one of my favorite things, is the ability to reorder loops. Rather than having to rip up my pedal board and move this pedal over here or this effect in the front, I can just go right into the editor and say I want this pedal here instead and see how that stacks. And not to mention just my workflow has been amazing. Just being able to say on this song I'm gonna tap this and bring these delays in, and I'll save it. And and that saves what loops are in the signal, that saves what MIDI changes I want. It's just been nuts. And then really you can't beat the footprint. You have this super powerful device but in a very, very small footprint, which leaves room for you to put other things you may need on your board. But I'm absolutely loving it. It's incredible.
So before we deconstruct that sound, I want to take a moment to talk about how you organize presets into songs and songs into setlist. And the amazing thing is you can do that in the PBC editor without having to have it connected to the PBC via the USB jack on the back. Now here's the thing, is that's called offline editing. So imagine you're on tour and your pedal board is at the gig and you go back to the hotel for a minute and your lead vocalist is like, hey, we're going to change the set. You're like, no problem. You just get to the venue, you connect up a USB cable, and you push the new set list forward, and boom, you're there. So let's talk about how we're going to create set lists. So we're going to start off in the Songs tab, and the workflow kind of goes from left to right and right to left. So we've got the HX Stomp song loaded, and over here are the presets in that song. You remember that HX/S space 30-1-2-3. But wait, we didn't end up using that preset, so I'm going to hit the Control key and I'm going to delete that. But you know what? Just in case I wanted to have it available, I'm going to go back and select it, and boom, because this is highlighted here, it's going to get added back into that song. Very cool. So moving over to the Setlists tab, we've got the PBC 6X set list. And the songs in that set list are Vacation, Stomp Blues, HX Stomp, Acoustic Power, and Reordered. Now wait a second, there's a song missing, so all I do is go over here and select that. I go over to the right column and I add JP2C, and
boom, we're ready to transfer this over to the PBC 6X. So for this demo, we're utilizing the insert function on the PBC 6X. And basically, we've set up what is normally referred to as the 4-cable method, but technically, I'm using 5 cables. All right, I'm coming out of the PBC 6X in mono using a tip sleeve cable into the front end of the Mesa Boogie JP2C, John Petrucci Signature Amp. I'm coming out of the preamp out into the ISP decimator pedal, which for this demo was off. In turn, I'm coming out of that pedal, returning into the loop. And again, that's a mono send, so everything there is TS jacks. Then, out of the main output of the interfacer, I'm coming back in to the return on the Mesa Boogie. In terms of what's going on the board, I had the MXR Dynacomp and the timeline. Now, a couple of interesting things. I'm a stereo fanatic. This box here, the interfacer from Goodwood Audio, allows you to sum stereo signals. So this was kind of with the timeline there, a stereo signal. You just kind of press and hold this guy down, and it goes into stereo summing mode and basically takes all that stereo goodness and sums it down to mono. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to get, but it's one of my favorite sounds from all the demos. This thing is magic. So then it just sends the signal to the return of the boogie, and that's what you heard. So for that last demo, I was integrating the ISP decimator pedal. And basically, it's a gate. So when I stop playing, it basically, and then when I start playing, you hear the guitar. So those kind of hard stops and starts are what make that thing so incredibly cool. All right. Now, obviously, I wasn't using any other effects. All right, so here's the deal. 40 minutes in, you are a rock star. Thanks so much for watching. So I have an Easter egg for you. When I was working on these demos, it occurred to me that we could use the second input as a reamp output. And with a little bit of magic in the editor there, you can use this device for reamping. That is to say, you can be running all your tones and miking them up and all of that, but you can take a feed before any of that stuff happens and send that to Pro Tools. Then using something like a reamp, you can bring that signal back and feed it back through the board after the fact and be able to tweak your tones or tweak your amp and do all of that stuff. You can get to that via the editor. Super, super cool. All right, thanks so much for watching. Really appreciate it. For more information, please visit the RJM website, and I would like to invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks again for watching. Cheers.